Hi, I'm Bella. My husband said his ex made better ribs while I was serving dinner at our own family BBQ. I smiled through it, like I always do, like I did when they cropped me out of photos, skipped me on emails, replaced me in meetings. But when my daughter played that video, the one that showed him and his assistant alone when he was supposed to be at work, that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part? Realizing they all knew before I did. How long had I been the only one pretending this was still my family? The air smelled like charcoal and marinated ribs, but it didn't feel like a celebration. Not to me, anyway. I'd been up since before dawn, laying out tablecloths, stringing lights, prepping serving trays with hand-printed labels. Everything looked perfect. People always said that about my setups, that I had an eye. Funny how many compliments you can receive without ever actually being seen. They called it the annual Whitmore Summer BBQ, a family tradition, as Corbin liked to boast to his partners. But there was nothing traditional about how it landed on my plate. I wasn't asked. I was assigned. Sable had suggested it weeks ago in the group chat, worded so cleverly I could almost believe it had been my idea. Rava always makes everything look effortless, she wrote, followed by 3 clapping emojis. So here I was, in my own backyard, the caterer, decorator, greeter, and cleaner. Everyone was arriving in sundresses and boat shoes, waving and laughing, hugging Corbin like he was a hometown hero. They barely made eye contact with me. It was like I'd been absorbed into the landscaping, no more noticeable than the patio stones under their sandals. Sable made her entrance precisely at 2 p.m., in linen slacks and a peach blouse that made her look like a southern lifestyle blogger. Just like Chloe used to do it, she said, scanning the spread like a critic at a county fair. You remember Chloe, right? Hard to forget, I said, forcing a smile while adjusting a centerpiece. I remembered everything, including the passive-aggressive text thread weeks ago when Elowin chimed in with, Chloe always added those little rosemary sprigs. Such class. Corbin had responded with a thumbs up. I said nothing, because silence was the only form of control I had left. Elowin approached the buffet with a glass of white wine already in hand. This looks lovely, she said, her eyes skimming the decor. Corbin's got such good taste. Must have guided the vision, huh? I bit my lip, nodded. Must have. Hosting doesn't mean you're honored. Sometimes it just means you're invisible. Later, while waiting for the ribs to come off the grill, I pulled out my phone to check a few messages. On impulse, I opened the company website. Not the public one, the internal directory. I used to be listed there, VP of Communications, until I took a temporary leave to help with Zadie's school issues last year. I never returned officially, but my name remained. Or so I thought. It was gone. Just gone. In my place, Rava Whitmore, wife of CEO Corbin Whitmore. No mention of the 3 statewide campaigns I ran. No trace of the crisis I averted when a former board member tried to leak documents, not even my own damn job title. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over it like it might apologize. Instead, I screenshot the page and quietly locked the phone. As if on cue, I heard Elowin's voice from a few feet away, lilting and casual. Too many names confuse clients. Let's keep things streamlined. I didn't move, I didn't breathe, but I felt it. The subtle recalibration, the organized effort to erase me. I slipped into the kitchen under the pretense of checking the drinks. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and that was the problem. There, leaning against the counter, I glanced at the refrigerator. A family photo was pinned with a fruit-shaped magnet. Last Thanksgiving, Corbin, Sable, Elowin, Zadie, and me. Or more accurately, the half of me that hadn't been cropped by accident. My face was partially cut off, as if I'd leaned out of frame right before the shutter clicked. It was ridiculous, almost funny. But it wasn't. My father's voice echoed in my head. If they erase your name, sign it in fire. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and straightened up. I pasted on the smile that had gotten me through 5 awkward fundraisers and 3 public humiliation dinners. Then I walked back outside, holding a tray like it was armor. Sable was at it again, this time guiding Malis, Corbin's assistant, unofficially, around the lawn. She's such a natural, Sable told anyone within earshot. A real asset to Corbin, reminds me of Chloe in the best ways. Guests nodded. Someone even murmured, Chloe vibes? I didn't know what that meant exactly, but I felt it. Malis smiled and set down napkins like she belonged here, like she'd always belonged here. Corbin touched her shoulder briefly, casually, like you'd pat a coworker, but his fingers lingered half a second too long. Enough for people to notice, enough for Zadie to notice. I saw her watching from the steps, knees hugged to her chest, eyes narrowed. She didn't say anything, neither did I. But I felt her processing it. I stood among the guests, offering drinks and refills, making polite chatter, and somehow I wasn't there at all. In my mind, I began a quiet list. The missing CCs on email threads. The board meetings I no longer got invites to. The sudden shift of family gatherings being planned without asking my availability. This BBQ wasn't a tradition. It was a transition. And I was no longer part of the script. It's not the grand betrayals that hurt most. It's the ones that look like you should smile through them. I sipped my iced tea slowly, watching everyone play their parts like it was opening night and no one had bothered to hand me a costume. Then Zadie walked up, silent as a shadow. She leaned in close and said quietly, "Mom, check Dad's phone when you get a chance." My eyes shifted toward Corbin, who was laughing again, head tilted too far back, teeth on full display. Malis stood beside him, laughing too. I didn't feel my heart drop. No, it didn't sink this time. It hardened. Zadie's whisper still echoed in my head as I stirred the coleslaw bowl with a wooden spoon that suddenly felt heavier than it should. Check Dad's phone. Not a dramatic request, not an accusation, just a calm statement spoken by a girl who had seen too much, too young. But I didn't reach for the phone right away. Instead, I scanned the backyard, not for anything obvious, but for the mechanics of the moment. The way people gathered around Corbin like he was the sun. Malis hovered nearby, nodding at every word he said, offering him water he didn't ask for. It was all so perfectly choreographed. I wasn't just being replaced, I was being rewritten. I moved slowly, deliberately, picked up a tray, offered drinks, checked that the buffet line hadn't collapsed into chaos. But the truth was, I was watching everything. When you become invisible, you learn to see every corner, every whisper, every eye roll. The silence was louder than it had ever been. And I was done mistaking it for peace. Near the grill, Corbin held court, tongs in one hand, beer in the other. "You know, Chloe always had a way with smoked ribs," he said, laughing like it was a harmless anecdote. The guests chuckled. Aunt Lorna nodded. "She had such a great eye for detail, too," she added, sipping her mimosa. I didn't flinch. My body stayed rooted, but inside something snapped, not from the name itself, but the ease with which it was spoken, the comfort, the casualness. They talked about Chloe like she was a family recipe passed down and polished. And I was just the one refilling the deviled eggs. I remembered a quote I read once, probably during one of those late nights spent aimlessly scrolling to drown out silence. "People don't replace you. They just forget they ever had to." My eyes caught Elowen leaning into Malis, lips curled into a conspiratorial smirk. "She reminds me of Chloe," she said. Not whispered, stated. Clearly, audibly. Malis laughed softly, the kind of laugh you'd hear from someone who knew they were being groomed for a throne. I began connecting dots I had previously chosen not to see. Chloe, the darling ex. Malis, the rising star. Same tone, same style, same perfume I used to wear until Corbin started saying it gave him a headache. He didn't want to erase Chloe. He wanted to replicate her. And I had been the placeholder. A few minutes later, Corbin placed his phone down on the patio table next to the lemonade pitcher and walked toward the smoker. I reached for it. Not fast, not furtively, just with finality. The screen lit up with a fingerprint-free swipe. I didn't scroll far. My name was saved under Home. Once upon a time, I was Rav in his contacts. Short, playful, personal. Now I was a function, a location, a placeholder. I kept scrolling, just one row down. Muse. Message preview. We'll make a better impression this time. I didn't open the thread. I didn't need to. The implication said enough. I wasn't his partner. I was logistics. And she was the pitch, the vision. I set the phone back down where I found it. My breath was steady, but my hands felt distant, disconnected, like they belonged to someone watching me from above. I returned to the kitchen, opened the fridge to check the pitcher levels just for something to do. I poured myself a drink I didn't want and sipped without tasting. Outside, Corbin's voice rang clear. Chloe just knew how to make everything feel effortless, didn't she? I stood frozen for a moment. It wasn't nostalgia. It was rebranding. One name being strategically phased out, while another was being softly resurrected through memory and manipulation. Someone nearby asked Malis if she'd be taking over the family charity auction this year. That used to be mine. I organized it for 4 years straight. Sable chimed in, loud and rehearsed. Well, Malis already has that flair Chloe used to bring to events. It's in her nature. My glass was empty before I realized I'd finished it. I set it down gently and walked away, not out of weakness, but restraint. It's always easier to stay quiet than to explode in a room full of people who are rooting for your replacement. I didn't cry. I didn't march up to Corbin or Malis. I simply took inventory. That's what we're taught, isn't it? American women. We're taught to hold it in meetings, hold it in marriage, hold it in our mouths. And so I held it. I counted the chairs Malis had rearranged, the way she led the prayer, the way guests followed her cue on when to clap, where to sit, what to say. This BBQ wasn't a tradition. It was a presentation. And I had become the prop that no one bothered to dust off. I looked at Zadie, sitting near the fence with a plastic cup in her hand, legs crossed, observing. Not scrolling, not distracted, just watching. That stillness, that quiet intelligence. She wasn't confused. She wasn't surprised. She knew. And she'd known before I let myself admit it. I made a vow in that moment. Not a loud one, not dramatic, just internal. If I was being edited out, I would choose how my final scene played. I would exit with my own lighting, not theirs. Malis called out for more plates, and someone leapt to help. Not me. I simply watched. I took notes. I measured silences like they were currency. Corbin didn't correct a single moment. He watched her perform, and he nodded along like she had already earned the next chapter. I smiled. It was the kind of smile you offer someone when you know they've underestimated you for the last time. Corbin raised his glass and called out, "Let's toast to old friends and new beginnings!" Malis stepped closer beside him, eyes shining, lips parted for the inevitable applause. And I stood very still. I didn't join the toast. I stood at the edge of the patio, glass of iced tea warming in my hand, watching everyone lift theirs like it meant something. To old friends and new beginnings, Corbin had said. It landed well, too well. I watched smiles stretch, shoulders touch, glasses clink. It looked like celebration, but it felt like grief. He used to say, "A family is made of moments that survive scrutiny." I used to believe him. But here I was, watching my family toast to something I hadn't been invited to understand, let alone shape. They weren't toasting to growth or legacy. They were burying me, quietly, elegantly, without words. The house offered brief refuge. I slipped inside, not because I couldn't take the heat outside, but because I needed to feel the walls. Something tangible, safe, something that wouldn't lie to my face. I headed toward the fireplace on instinct, a focal point, a constant. But the photo was gone. I stopped dead. The wedding photo of Corbin and me, the one I chose, the one he said would be forever front and center, was missing. In its place sat a minimalist print of a beige flower, abstract, unemotional. It matched Malis's aesthetic perfectly. I'd seen the same image on her Instagram story just last week, right under a caption, "Clean slates, clear minds." My stomach twisted. I searched the room like someone who had just lost their keys, frantic but unwilling to appear desperate. I looked on the piano in the hallway, even checked behind the curtain rod. Nothing. It wasn't on display. I opened the storage closet, and there it was, buried behind holiday boxes, frame cracked, glass slightly chipped at the corner. Face down, not just removed, discarded. They didn't just take me out of the spotlight, I whispered to myself. They threw me in the basement. I sat on the staircase, the photo in my lap. My thumb traced the edge of our smiles, still preserved, still pretending. The picture hadn't changed, but everything around it had. I thought about the ways women disappear, not in one grand vanishing, but in pieces. First, the name, then the title, then the seat at the table. They don't rip you out. They revise you out, and it works because we let it. I remembered something Eleanor Roosevelt once said: "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I had been consenting. I stared at that photo, and for the first time in months, I felt something inside me realign, not from sadness, but clarity. The next move wouldn't be about reacting, it would be about reclaiming. My phone buzzed. A notification from the family execs group chat lit up the screen. I tapped it without thinking. We were finalizing the fall strategy next week, and I needed to. "You are no longer a member of this conversation." I blinked, certain I misread it, but the words didn't go away. I refreshed. Same message. It wasn't a glitch. It was a goodbye. And I hadn't been told. A slow burn crawled up the back of my neck. I'd created that chat 4 years ago. After a tax audit revealed gaps in our bookkeeping, I built that entire communication system from scratch. I trained half of them on what transparency looked like. Now I was removed. No thank you, no reason, just deleted. I checked my other threads. Ops plus media, auction team. Malis was in all of them now. Her name was there, crisp and clean. Mine wasn't. This wasn't erasure. This was succession. Zadie stepped inside quietly. "Want a refill?" she asked, tilting her head toward my empty glass. "I'm fine," I said, scanning her face. She looked older today. Not in age, something else. Composure. Knowing. I glanced down at the wedding photo one last time, then gently placed it on the counter. Outdoors again, the afternoon light had softened, but my vision had sharpened. I made a mental inventory. What do I legally own? What access still has my name on it? Who still sees me as part of this family, not just a function? Havana's voice echoed in my head. I could still picture him in his recliner, reading the local paper aloud like it was scripture. "They don't need to punch you if they can vote you off the island," he once said when a friend got blindsided at work. This wasn't just emotional, this was operational. As I stepped past the hedges, I heard Corbin laughing with someone. "Streamlining family operations," he was saying. "It's been a lifesaver. Less mess." Malis nodded beside him, holding a clipboard like she'd been running logistics for years. She had a pen behind her ear, the kind of casual power move you don't even register until it's too late. I didn't interrupt. I didn't speak. I simply let the silence expand. Let it make them wonder. And when they didn't even notice, I smiled. "You don't fire me," I whispered under my breath. "I quit." Loudly. I reached for my phone. Slowly, deliberately, I opened the camera and began taking photos, not for memory, but for evidence. One of Malis adjusting the buffet sign. One of Corbin under the new Family Legacy banner that had replaced my hand-lettered one from last year. And then Zadie appeared beside me. She didn't say much, just leaned in and asked, "You ready for the second act, Mom?" I looked at her and nodded. The second toast came without warning, like a door closing just a little too loudly. I was still sitting with Zadie's words lodged under my ribs. "You ready to flip the script?" When Sable clinked her glass and stood in front of the patio, voice syrupy and rehearsed. "I just want to take a moment," she began, her tone dressed in civility, "to appreciate all the fresh energy we've felt in the family this year. It's amazing what a little reinvention can do." People murmured polite sounds of agreement, raising their glasses again. I didn't. I watched them over the rim of mine, the ice cubes long since melted. Everything looked perfect. From the flower arrangements to the charcuterie board labels, it had the polished sheen of an event crafted by someone with a Pinterest board and no soul. I scanned the guests, noting which ones gravitated to the center and which faded toward the edges, just like me. I'd always thought I'd recognize the moment it was over. Turns out, you don't. It doesn't come with yelling or slamming doors. It comes with a toast and a smile that isn't for you. Near the grill, Aunt Lorna chuckled. "Chloe used to make those deviled eggs just like that, perfect folds and all." Someone else added, "She always brought that lemon vinaigrette. God, I still crave it." Malis stood near the buffet, pretending not to hear but glowing just the same. "Oh, those are just recipes I picked up here and there," she said with a shrug that screamed rehearsed modesty. "Nothing special. I recognized the platters, the plating, the little chalk signs. They weren't hers. They were Chloe's. I knew because I had spent 3 years scrubbing the house of Chloe's influence. Not out of jealousy, but because that's what women are asked to do when they move into a legacy, not a home. And now, I saw every detail duplicated like it had never left. They weren't hiding the blueprint anymore. They were using it. An hour earlier, I'd arrived to check setup, early, as always. I walked into the backyard to find Malis already there. She'd rearranged the tables, placed laminated family values signs on the buffet, and was pinning a fabric runner I'd never seen. "Oh, Rava," she said brightly, as if I were the guest. "I just wanted to help things run smoother." I stood there for half a second, caught between disbelief and a laugh I couldn't afford. She kept moving, gesturing to a seating chart printed in color and taped neatly to a foam board. The kind of detail I used to obsess over, back when I thought being thoughtful meant being valued, back when I thought Corbin actually needed me. He'd let her in. Of course he had. Not just into the house, into the space I held, into the rolls I carried like groceries across a slippery driveway. The emotional labor, the planning, the smoothing over, all of it now passed off to someone who could parrot Chloe's charm with updated branding. Malis wasn't the other woman. She was the candidate. I'd watched it happen once before. Chloe, adored, then edged out the moment she made too many suggestions. I remembered how Corbin told me she got tired of adjusting. That's how he described her boundaries. And now I saw myself in the same place. Not with jealousy, with recognition. They never mourned Chloe. They replaced her with less grief and more applause. I had been the adored one once, too. Then I became good with logistics, the one who remembers the napkins. The steady hand. Not the partner, the prop. This family didn't ask women to build something with them. They hired us to maintain the illusion of order. I walked away from the circle of conversation, set down my glass on a tray I hadn't intended to carry, and sat alone under the pergola. Corbin glanced over. His brow furrowed for a second, probably because I wasn't smiling, but he didn't approach. He just turned back to Malis, who handed him another plate like it was instinct. Elowen slid next to me with her wine and tilted her head. "You okay?" she asked, her voice thick with mock concern. "Just enjoying watching the show," I replied, not even bothering to look at her. She blinked, unsure whether to laugh or retreat. She retreated. No one else came to check in. But I noticed Malis look my way, just once, before adjusting a chair and laughing at something Corbin whispered. I turned my head and caught my reflection in the patio door. Hair curled just right, blouse perfectly pressed, and eyes that no longer recognized the woman wearing either. "They think I'll go quietly," I whispered to no one. Zadie appeared beside me, set a glass of water on the table, and leaned in close. "They're almost done rehearsing," she said. Then quietly, like a secret meant only for me, "You ready to flip the script?" I didn't answer. I smiled. The wind had picked up just enough to rustle the paper napkins on the buffet table. I sat alone under the canopy, tea forgotten in my hand, letting the hum of conversations blend into one long, meaningless buzz. Plates clinked, laughter rose in polite bursts, and Corbin was still playing the role of charming host like nothing underfoot had shifted. I caught Zadie's eye across the lawn. She wasn't smiling, wasn't fidgeting, just still. Her glance flicked toward the mounted TV near the outdoor bar. A signal. What's the price of peace? And what has it ever bought me besides being dismissed politely? I took a deep breath. Not the kind to calm myself, but the kind you take before a step that can't be undone. Zadie rose, walked slowly toward the bar, lifted the remote, and tapped "Cast from phone." No flourish, no announcement. The screen flickered, then turned bright. Corbin's face appeared, frozen mid-laugh. But it wasn't live. It was a photo. One taken from behind, just far enough to seem accidental, except the angle was intentional. His hand rested low on Malis's back, fingers trailing past what could ever be explained away as innocent. Her head tilted into his, soft smile framed against a background that I immediately recognized as the cafe downtown. Last Thursday. They were supposed to be in separate meetings across town. The timestamp in the corner didn't lie, and neither did the image. Gasps swept through the patio. One cousin's fork clattered against her plate. Elowen's wine glass hit the bricks and shattered. People turned their heads, then looked back at me. I didn't look at Corbin. I watched them. The people who had smiled through this party, who had whispered and nodded and let the script run, pretending it was all just family politics. Aunt Clara muttered, "That doesn't look like business to me." Corbin stepped forward, pale and visibly rattled. "This is taken out of context," he began. "No one asked for context," I said, voice clear and even. "They just see what they've ignored for too long." A beat of silence fell heavier than anything else all afternoon. Then the speaker clicked again. A new file began playing. Zadie's voice wasn't on it, only his. Corbin's voice crackled through the speakers. "Just smile tomorrow. This isn't about family. This is about optics." The party froze. I turned to look at him for the first time, now. His mouth opened, then closed, and then, "Don't let her stand too close to the mic." A few people gasped audibly. Sable dropped her gaze. Someone whispered, "Wow." Zadie stepped back from the controls and looked straight at me. And I, in that moment, thought, my daughter has more spine than the man I married. Corbin lunged forward, hand outstretched toward the remote. Zadie didn't flinch. She simply stepped back, calm as a still lake. "This is unnecessary," Malis said, her voice rising as she moved toward the center of the patio. I didn't give her the satisfaction. "So is betrayal," I said, meeting her gaze directly. "But here we are." Sable cleared her throat, voice sharp. "Let's not make a scene in front of the whole family." I turned toward her. "This scene was cast long before I showed up. I'm just reciting the lines you all wrote." Gasps turned to murmurs. Eyes dropped. Phones came out. I saw 3 people filming. Corbin hissed, "You're trying to ruin me in front of everyone." I turned to face him fully. "No, I'm holding up a mirror. What you see? That's on you." He looked at Malis. She didn't move. I felt something shift inside me. Not break, but align. I wasn't here to save this anymore. I was here to document it. I remembered something Maya Angelou once said. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And I hadn't. I'd believed the second time. The third. The 15th. Every apology layered under charm. Every omission disguised as tact. Every, "it's not like that," dressed as diplomacy. I had disappeared in the name of preservation. But visibility isn't vanity. It's survival. Zadie walked back to her chair, her steps unhurried. She picked up her drink and sat, like she was watching a play unfold just the way she wrote it. Corbin turned and stormed inside. The screen door slammed harder than it should have. I didn't follow. I rose from my chair, straightened my dress, and walked to the mic stand near the DJ setup. I turned toward Sable, who hadn't spoken since her earlier protest. "I believe," I said, "you once told me to know my place." She blinked slowly. "Well, I do," I continued, "and it's no longer here." I stepped back, pulled out my phone, opened a folder labeled Proof. The screen lit up as I tapped the first file, a document I'd saved weeks ago, then another, and another. As I faced the crowd, my voice didn't waver. "If you won't talk," I said, "I will." The backyard had changed. It wasn't the wind or the lighting. Something deeper had shifted. The silence now was weighty, not peaceful. Guests stood in small clusters, whispering behind raised hands, casting cautious glances toward the house, toward me, toward the TV that had just outed the man they'd been praising 30 minutes ago. The air buzzed like a courtroom after a verdict, except no judge had spoken. Just truth. Then the screen door creaked. Corbin stormed back outside, red-faced, jaw tight, barely holding his posture together. His walk was aggressive but contained, the way a man moves when he knows he's losing ground, but refuses to admit it. He stopped inches from me, voice low, tight through clenched teeth. "We need to talk. Now." I looked up, steady. "You've had years. I'm talking now." His hand reached out, grasping my arm. Not rough, not gentle either, just urgent. "Please," he said. "Not here. Not like this." Around us, the party froze again. Guests pretended to focus on the desserts, on their drinks, on napkin folds, but every eye was locked in peripheral vision, every head tilted just slightly in our direction. Zadie, sitting nearby, casually lifted her phone. No big movements, just a thumb swipe. The screen blinked and the voice memo app opened. I leaned closer to Corbin, made sure my voice carried. "Say what you need to say. They've all been listening anyway." He swallowed hard. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this. We've been under pressure, the business is stretched thin, and you've been distant, closed off." I stared at him. "You compared me to your ex, replaced me with your assistant, and asked our daughter to keep quiet about it. Don't call that distance. Call it damage." The muscles in his face jerked. He blinked like the words physically struck him. Malis approached, her expression tight. "This has gone too far," she said. Her voice pitched higher than usual, defensive and brittle. I didn't flinch. I turned my eyes to her and said, clear and cold, "Far enough to find what's under your shirt?" A hush fell again, real silence this time. Not social quiet, the kind that says something's coming and no one's sure how to stop it. Malis's hands moved instinctively, covering her lower stomach. Her blouse had stretched earlier, subtly, but it was enough. "If you're going to carry his child," I said, stepping forward, "at least carry the truth." Sable gasped loud enough to draw looks. Elowen physically recoiled, her drink splashing onto her sleeve. Corbin opened his mouth. "This isn't what it looks like," I turned to the crowd. "Then tell them what it is. Tell them why she's been calling our daughter stepsister behind closed doors." A ripple of noise moved through the guests. A cough, a dropped fork, a mumbled, "Oh my God." I finally faced the full crowd, taking the center of the space I'd been pushed out of for years. "I have been your family's convenience," I said, "your unpaid fundraiser, your silent crisis manager, your photo-ready reputation cover. I was good enough to build this home, but never enough to stay in the portrait." People looked at the TV, still paused on Corbin's smirking face beside Malis. I stepped to the side, pointed to it. "Want more? I have folders." Corbin didn't respond. He turned, walked toward the gate, jaw clenched, shoulders squared. But retreat is retreat, no matter how straight your back. Malis remained rooted. Sable sat down hard in the nearest chair, her face pale, her hands shaking, her lips pressed tight. Zadie walked forward and stood beside me. No dramatics, just presence. She looked older today, wiser than she had any right to be at 16. "You asked me last week," she said quietly, "if I believed you still mattered in this house." I remembered that moment. Over dishes. Her voice low, her eyes too knowing for her age. "I didn't answer then," she continued, "but I am now." She turned to the guests. "This isn't drama. This is a reckoning." No one moved. No one argued. I looked at her, not with pride, but with awe. She didn't flinch in front of Sable, didn't back down from Malis. She stood beside me like a pillar I never expected to lean on. I rested a hand gently on her shoulder, then stepped forward alone. At the fire pit, the coals still glowed. I pulled out a file folder, labeled, sealed, clean. No need to shout. The weight of it was enough. I held it up for just a second, then let it fall into the flames. Papers curled instantly, names burned, dates disintegrated. "Everything I've carried for years," I said softly. "You don't get to carry it now." A voice behind me asked, unsure, "What happens next?" I turned toward them, eyes steady. Whatever I say does. The fire had finished its work, leaving only curled ashes and a circle of silence. No one dared speak. The clinking of forks, the hum of chatter. All gone. In its place, a heavy tension lingered in the air, the kind that doesn't break with words, only with reckoning. I stood still, Not triumphant, not smug, just present, centered. I didn't need applause. I didn't need anyone to agree. I just needed the truth to settle where it belonged. Out in the open. Then Sable rose. She moved slowly, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve, adjusting the pearl necklace at her throat like it was armor. Without so much as a glance in my direction, she picked up a butter knife from the dessert table and tapped it lightly against her glass. A subtle clang rang out, demanding the floor. "I'd like to say something," she began, voice clipped. "Due to the distractions we've experienced today, the family trust will pause all current project funding tied to Corbin's branch." The words didn't land gently. They landed like a guillotine. Gasps broke out before people could catch themselves. One of Corbin's cousins, the one who'd just pitched a new clothing line last week, dropped her drink. I saw Corbin emerge from the house, eyes wild, just in time to hear her say the word, pause. He charged forward. "What the hell are you doing?" Sable didn't blink. "Cleaning house?" That was it. 2 words. Cool. Surgical. Malis instinctively reached for Corbin's arm. He pulled away, not harshly, but fast enough to humiliate her. His attention wasn't on her. It was on the fallout, the money, the optics. It's always money first with men like him. Even when the house is on fire, they look for what's insured. I scanned the crowd, saw the shifting stances, the subtle recoils. People were no longer sure whose side they were on. Not because they doubted what was true, but because the tide had turned. Then I turned to Elowen. She'd been quiet. Too quiet. I'd learned that about her. She only stepped back when she was calculating a new angle. I didn't wait. "Remember when you invited Chloe to that charity gala while I was out of town?" The name hit her like a slap. She blinked, trying to recover. "What?" "You remember," I said, stepping toward the gift table. "You posted it. #LegacyVibes. I picked up the group photo from 3 years ago, framed and dusted with fake affection. There they were, Elowen and Chloe, arms linked. I held it up. This isn't nostalgia. This was sabotage dressed in sequins. The guests started murmuring again, louder this time. Some gasped, others glanced at Elowen. She dropped her facade, face hardening. "It was just a joke," she snapped. "A joke," I repeated slowly. "A joke is something both people laugh at. You knew exactly what you were doing." She stepped back like the ground had shifted, because it had. Corbin tried to step in again, fumbling for control. "You're twisting timelines, Rava." Before I could speak, Sable interrupted him. "I've seen the dates. I just ignored them." That was the moment. That was the crack. Everyone heard it. The matriarch hadn't been fooled. She'd been complicit. Not blind, just willfully so. I looked at her softly. "You didn't protect me. You protected tradition. And that tradition made room for every woman except the one married in." Sable didn't respond. But her hand twitched near her necklace, her polished veneer cracking just enough. Elowen didn't wait. She stormed toward the house, muttering, "People don't understand loyalty anymore." Her words trailed behind her like ash. I stood among the guests and realized something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment. I didn't need them. I didn't need their votes, their nods, their reluctant apologies. My strength had never come from their acceptance. It came from surviving without it. My father used to say, "Sometimes the reward for surviving a bad system is becoming the thing that breaks it." I let those words guide me as I walked through the crowd. They parted, not out of respect, but because discomfort makes people move. Good, let them squirm. Let them sit in the air they helped poison. I stopped at the buffet. On the table, laminated menu cards shimmered under the string lights. I picked one up. The font was too familiar. A delicate script I'd once seen on Chloe's wedding programs. Of course, same font, same pearls, same silence. I turned to Sable and held the card between 2 fingers. "Pearls and scripts," I said, just loud enough for nearby ears. "You've always known how to accessorize your loyalty." Her lip quivered. Finally, Zadie appeared at my side. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. She was already there. "Bring me the envelope we prepared," I said softly. "It's time." The envelope wasn't heavy in weight, but it may as well have been bricks. It throbbed in my hand like it carried every slight, every silence, every, "we didn't mean it like that." I'd swallowed for years. When Zadie handed it to me, she didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She knew what it meant. And now, so would they. The backyard had quieted again. A different silence than before. This was the kind of stillness that hangs before thunder. People shifted in place, unsure whether to sit or stand, to flee or witness. I walked forward with no fanfare, no microphone, just presence. They thought this would end with me walking away, I said to myself, just loud enough that only the wind could catch it. They forgot who taught me how to stand. Then I cleared my throat, not to get attention, but to signal I no longer needed permission to speak. I opened the envelope slowly and began to read. The messages were printed in black and white, clean fonts, clear timestamps. I read them in order, no color commentary, no embellishment, just Corbin's words to Malis. "I miss the way we talk when she's not around. I think she knows something. She won't say anything. She never does." The crowd stirred. One person audibly said, "Jesus." Malis stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "That's private." I looked at her, expression steady. "Privacy ends where betrayal begins." I kept reading. "She's not part of the plan. After the BBQ, we'll announce it. I've filed the papers." I paused, looked up at Corbin. He stared at me, blank. I folded the papers once, carefully, and placed them on the patio table like they were a restaurant bill. "Here's the thing," I said. "I filed first." Shock cracked through the air, like ice breaking under someone's weight. You don't hear it until it's too late. Then came the second envelope. From it, I pulled the joint ownership contract for the business. The same one Corbin and I signed when we launched the community campaign side of the company 5 years ago. I held it up so everyone could see. "This contract no longer exists. My lawyer nullified it last week. I've pulled out my name, my investment, and my silence." The expression on Corbin's face turned to ash. Flashback to the coffee shop last Tuesday. Me, sitting across from my lawyer, signing the forms quietly over chamomile tea. His voice in my memory. "You ready for this?" My father's words echoed louder. "Revenge is loud, but justice is paperwork." Phones were out again. People were texting now. Board members, cousins, associates. I caught Elowin mutter something that didn't sound printable. I turned to the guests. "You've all seen what I was edited out of, but none of you saw what I was holding together." I started listing. No theatrics, just facts. I handled every vendor contract. Covered late invoices when Corbin said it'd be embarrassing to delay. I wrote every speech for his public talks, the ones you all clapped for. I was the hand behind every glossy photo. Then I looked at Malis. "You wore my seat like a costume, and you forgot who made it fit." Malis shook her head slightly, trying to summon dignity. "You're just bitter." I smiled, but there was nothing soft in it. "No, I'm the woman you hoped would leave quietly, and I'm the reason you won't sleep tonight." That line, it landed, because they all knew it was true. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in months stepped forward. She shook my hand in front of everyone. "You built this brand," she said. "We know now." Others started moving, quietly, politely. Some excused themselves. One of Corbin's business partners walked out with his phone pressed tight to his ear, probably rehearsing his statement already. Elowin stomped into the house like a bad ending she hadn't rewritten in time. But Sable, she stayed seated. She didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at the fire pit like she was watching a funeral she hadn't known she'd be hosting. I turned to Zadie. She nodded once, slow. This moment, we had built it together. Then I spotted the laminated family values signage Malis had made for the buffet. I walked over, picked one up, and turned it in my hand. Without hesitation, I tossed it into the fire pit. The flames leapt, hungry. It cracked and curled until only soot remained. "Let this burn," I said, voice calm, "with the version of me you invented." Corbin stepped toward me then, hands slightly raised, not threatening, not pleading, just tentative. His mouth opened. "You've said enough," I said, "to everyone but me." And then I walked inside. I didn't look back. The guests stepped aside as I moved, quiet and parted, like the Red Sea had nothing on a woman finally done apologizing for existing. The next morning, the wind moved through the backyard like it was trying to erase the memory of the night before. Empty wine glasses tipped over in the grass. Crumpled napkins lay stuck to damp chair legs. The string lights still glowed faintly, even though the sun had already crept over the fence. I stood barefoot on the patio with a mug of black coffee, watching the fire pit. Funny how silence sounds different when you're the one who created it. Zadie came out behind me without a word. She wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Her presence was enough. We stood there, the two of us, looking at the aftermath, not just of a party, but of a truth finally let loose. What we burned wasn't just evidence. It was permission. I didn't have to pretend anymore. A black car pulled up quietly to the curb. Right on time. I set my coffee down on the edge of the fire pit and walked to the gate. Out stepped a woman in a navy pantsuit, hair pulled back, expression unreadable. She didn't need an introduction, not for me. We shook hands and sat at the patio table. Corbin stumbled out of the house, shirt wrinkled, tie half off, looking like someone who'd lost a chess match in his sleep. The lawyer turned slightly toward him, businesslike. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm here to confirm what your wife already told you yesterday." He froze mid-step. She laid a brown envelope on the table. "Here are the finalized separation documents. Full asset division. Signatures notarized and filed with the county." Corbin looked at me, disbelief painted across his face. "You had this ready before the BBQ?" I didn't blink. "I did." His voice dropped. "You planned this?" "I wanted to see," I said calmly, "if you'd still try to lie through it." "And you did." He didn't respond. I leaned back in my chair. No gloating, no glares. Just a woman who'd prepared for the worst and had it delivered on time. While he flipped through the documents, I thought about the years that led here. Saving emails, quietly backing up bank statements, conversations with Havana on Sunday afternoons when he'd tell me, "Always have your name on the deed and always know how to get it off." There's a myth that women leave out of rage, but the truth is quieter than that. We don't leave because we're angry. We leave because we're ready. Zadie sat across from me, watching everything without interrupting. She was learning, not from what I said, but from how I stood while saying it. Later, Corbin asked me for 5 minutes alone. I agreed, not because he deserved it, but because some endings need to be witnessed in person. We stood in the hallway near the front door. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Maybe we can figure something out. I mean, for the family. For appearances." "For appearances," I repeated. "I just don't want this to blow back on the business. We could still co-parent, keep it civil." I looked at him, really looked. "You destroyed the family image to build your ego." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "And if you're wondering whether this is revenge, it's not. You wouldn't survive my revenge. This is relief. Revenge would have meant staying married to you." I walked away before he could answer. Over the next few days, the ripples began. Texts from cousins, some kind, some hesitant, some coldly transactional. "Hey, just checking in, tough week." A few came out of the woodwork with apologies I didn't ask for. Sable never texted. Elowen blocked me. Malis deleted every photo from her profile and made her account private. I expected grief. What I got was lightness. I stopped chasing the version of family that demanded silence in exchange for belonging. I made a list one morning, sitting at my desk with Zadie playing music in the next room. People who stood up, people who stayed quiet, people who vanished. At the bottom I wrote, "Thank you for showing me who was never mine." Then I closed the notebook and didn't open it again. A few days later, my lawyer came back with one final document, the change of ownership on a small business I'd started years ago, one that Corbin never cared about. Now it was fully mine. Inside the folder was a note, handwritten in careful cursive. When they erase your name, register it somewhere else. I held the paper for a moment, letting the ink soak in deeper than the message itself. Then I turned to Zadie. "Get dressed," I said. She looked up from her phone. "To sue someone?" I shook my head, smirking. "No, to relaunch someone." Later that afternoon, after we left the lawyer's office, I held the finalized separation papers in my lap like they were still warm. The printer ink hadn't even settled, but my decision had. Boise looked the same. Traffic lights blinking in predictable rhythm, a cyclist waving as we passed. It was all too ordinary for the kind of seismic shift that had just clicked into permanence on paper. "It's strange," I murmured aloud, not to Zadie, but to the version of myself that had once thought marriage was permanent. "How heavy freedom feels at first." She didn't answer, just watched me from the passenger seat with quiet eyes and a kind of pride that didn't need to be spoken. Earlier that morning, before we left, Corbin had opened his laptop and found the kind of emails that don't come with a heads up. "In light of recent developments, we'll be halting all promotional collaboration effective immediately." That was from his biggest branding partner, the one who always used our family photos in holiday campaigns. Two more followed. One investor asked flatly, "Who's the actual brand builder?" That line stung, not just because it was true, but because he'd never admitted it even to himself. I had built the trust, the community relationships, the messaging. He'd just stood next to me in the photos. Meanwhile, I was on the phone with my attorney, finalizing the handover of the brand's intellectual property. My half, the part I'd trademarked in my name before Corbin ever thought we needed lawyers. Funny, I thought as I signed. I never raised my voice. I just raised my standards. I stopped for coffee at a cafe afterward, just a regular place I'd always liked, the kind that didn't serve artisanal foam or name drinks after famous people. While I waited for my drink, I heard two women whispering behind me. Didn't he cheat with the assistant? Apparently at the barbecue, his wife went nuclear. Good for her. I smiled. At a networking event 2 days later, the kind Corbin couldn't resist attending, a woman approached him and Malis, smiling politely. "So, you're the wife, right?" she asked Malis. The pause that followed could have split a mountain. Corbin fumbled. Malis smiled. Too wide. Too quickly. He didn't correct the woman. Didn't say anything at all. I watched from across the room, wearing beige and silence like armor. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. I didn't come to interrupt. I came to witness. And when he laughed, that hollow laugh he used when he wanted a moment to pass, I turned and left. I didn't need to wait for anything more. I already knew I had left the right rooms behind. Back at home, Zadie flopped onto the couch, grinning as she scrolled through her phone. "You're kind of famous now." I glanced up from my tea. "What do you mean?" She turned her screen toward me, a TikTok video, anonymous but unmistakable, me at the BBQ, folder in hand, Corbin's voice echoing over the speakers. A caption. "She didn't burn the house down. She made them watch it collapse." Hundreds of thousands of views. Comments pouring in. I shook my head, part amused, part unsettled. "I never wanted to go viral," I said. Zadie just smiled. "You didn't. You just wanted to be visible, and now they see you, even if they're late." I spent that evening going through boxes I hadn't touched in months. Old tax forms, dusty name tags from fundraisers, ghost-written bios I'd polished for Corbin's speaking gigs. Each paper held a version of me I'd been forced to archive for the sake of harmony. Now I filed them for a different reason. Some I scanned and emailed to my lawyer, not out of spite, but precaution. Documentation is dignity in legal form. The rest I fed into the shredder, slowly, quietly. I didn't cry. I didn't pause. "I don't need vengeance," I whispered to myself. "I need room to rebuild." The next morning, I drafted a launch email for my new consulting firm. My name at the top, no joint logos, no polite co-founder credits, just me. An hour later, I got a call. "Ms. Whitmore?" The voice on the other end asked. Speaking? This is Christina from the Women's Business Network. We'd be honored if you would be our keynote speaker for the annual summit. The theme this year is Rebuilding with Power. I paused, almost said no. Then I thought of Zadie at the BBQ. I thought of the girl who watched a room explode and never flinched. I'd be honored, I said. That night, she walked into my study with a box, sleek, wrapped, no card. Inside was a microphone, matte black, modern. Taped to the handle was a note. Time to write your own story out loud. I held it like it weighed something real. And I whispered, just to myself, just loud enough to echo, I hope he hears every word. The house was still. Not a tense stillness, but the kind that arrives when everything's been said and nothing else needs to be. No guests, no low laughter filtering through the hallway, no email pings, no phone buzzes, just quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, a chipped mug in front of me. The chair across from me was empty, the same one Corbin used to pull out every morning, the one where he'd drop his phone, ask what was for dinner, and glance at me over toast without ever really seeing me. Now it sat untouched. It used to mean partnership. Today, it meant peace. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel broken. I just felt still. Peace isn't loud. It's the absence of needing to be heard by someone who never listened. Zadie entered quietly, her socked feet padding across the tile. She sat down next to me, not pushing, not pretending to have answers. She played with the edge of her sleeve for a moment before speaking. If Dad hadn't cheated, would you still be with him? Her voice didn't carry judgment. It was just a question, a mirror. I froze. Not in guilt, but in clarity. I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe. I think I would have kept making excuses. I'd have kept telling myself that busyness is love and that silence is just exhaustion. Zadie nodded once. I didn't need to explain. She'd already lived the silence with me. I thought of the nights I'd sat at this same table, watching the clock while dinner cooled, making up narratives for where he was and why he didn't text. Convinced myself it was just pressure, just fatigue, just normal. But it wasn't normal. It was distance shaped like routine. So, in a way, Zadie said, he set you free. Her voice trembled a little, and I hate him for it, but I'm also glad. We didn't hug, we didn't cry, we just sat in truth. And that, for once, was enough. I stayed for safety, not love. I left for truth, not revenge. Later that night, after Zadie went to her room and the dishes were cleared, I pulled out my journal. The same one I'd hidden in my sock drawer, filled with half-written entries, post-it notes, and receipts of moments that had once broken me in secret. But I didn't open it to recount pain. I opened it to process clarity. They wanted my silence. I gave them my absence instead. I flipped through older pages. Notes scrawled late at night. Maybe I overreacted. He just doesn't like confrontation. I should be more understanding. I read those words like they were written by someone else. A woman who believed that shrinking herself was loyalty, that biting her tongue was strength. Now I wrote differently. This page wasn't full of questions. It was ownership. And when I closed the journal and locked it in the drawer, it wasn't to hide it. It was to mark that chapter as done. The next morning, a card arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name in Elowen's handwriting. Inside was a pre-printed message. Wishing you well. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an obligatory gesture. Later that afternoon, I found a pie dish on the porch. No note, just the dish I'd left behind at Sable's house the previous Thanksgiving. She hadn't included a message either. I didn't expect one. That evening, I opened an email from one of Corbin's former partners. You were always the reason we stayed, it read. I didn't respond. These half measures, they meant nothing. And yet, they meant everything. Because they knew. And I no longer needed the words. I knew. A few days later, Zadie came home from school, eyes lit up. "I started something," she said, holding up a flyer she'd designed herself. It read, "Voices Unmuted, a space for girls who are tired of pretending silence is strength." I looked at the flyer, at her handwriting, at the small drawing of a microphone beneath the title. "You did this?" I asked. She shrugged. "They needed it. I needed it." I offered to help, made suggestions on layout and color, but I let her lead. She printed dozens of copies and taped them around campus. She pitched it to her principal. And when the first meeting had 10 girls in a circle, sharing things they'd never said aloud before, she came home that night and said, "I think girls need to know silence isn't maturity. Speaking up is." I looked at her, this girl who had seen too much, heard too much, and somehow stood taller because of it. My chest swelled, not with pride, but with recognition. She wasn't strong because I protected her. She was strong because she watched me stop protecting a lie. That evening, after Zadie went to bed, I checked my email one last time. Subject: You've been selected to keynote, Reclaiming the Narrative, Boise Women's Summit. I stared at the screen. My fingers hovered over the mouse. My hands trembled, not from fear, but realization. They used to talk over me, now they wanted to listen. I whispered to myself, the words rolling off my tongue like a promise. "I'm ready."